Hi guys, Dennis here, and welcome to my series of iOS development videos covering a variety of topics. This is part 2 of videos dedicated to the ins and outs of creating and using table views. And as I mentioned before, table views are the heart of all but the most simplistic of iOS applications, and the need to master them is of the utmost importance. In this video, we're going to create a table using a storyboard as our baseline. We'll populate the table view using a plist. And this is a fun file that I put together for another project. It contains a long list of surgical procedures and are grouped by body classification. We'll cover using NS Dictionary and NS Ray in this video and how to create sections in our table. I provided a link to download this plist on my YouTube About page. You'll definitely want to download this since it's quite a long file. So let's get started. Let's open up XCode and we'll select Create a New XCode Project. And this time we're going to start with an empty application and build everything that we need from scratch. So make sure Empty Application is selected and click Next. We're going to call this project TableViews Part 2. Make sure class prefix is empty, devices has been set to iPhone, and make sure automatic reference counting has been selected. Click Next, and click Create. And we have our project. So the first order of business now is to add a storyboard to our project. And to do so, we click on File, New, File, and under User Interface, let's select Storyboard. Click Next. Make sure the device family has been set to iPhone. Click Next. And we're going to call this Main Storyboard. And we'll click Create. And we now have a storyboard. So let's select our project in our project navigator, and under iPhone iPod deployment information, in the main storyboard drop down, we're going to select that file that we just created, main storyboard. Now let's go back to our storyboard, and we're going to drag an instance of UI TableView controller onto our storyboard. So TableView controller, drag and release. We also want to embed a navigation controller here, so let's select Editor, Embed in Navigation Controller. Let's close out our Utilities panel, and one of the advantages of doing this is that we now have a navigation bar in our table view. So let's go ahead and put a title in that, and to do so we just double click within the bar and we'll add a title. And we'll call it Surgical Procedures. So now we need to create a class file that we can eventually assign to this TableView controller. So once again, we can select File, New, File, or the shortcut is simply Command-N. And this time under iOS, we'll select Cocoa Touch and then Objective-C Class and click Next. And we'll call this Surgical Procedures TableView Controller. And make sure that it is a subclass of UI TableView Controller and not just View Controller. It's very important. Click Next and click Create. And we have our header and implementation file. So let's select Storyboard once again. Select our view controller, open up our utilities panel, and we'll go to our identity inspector, and let's assign that class file that we created to this view controller. So under class, open up the drop down and just select Surgical Procedures TableView Controller. Now let's go over to the AppDelegate M file. Let's close out our utilities panel to give us a little working room here. And in the first method, which is the application did finish launching with options, we're going to select everything except for the return statement and delete that. And this is to ensure that the storyboard loads. So let's go ahead and build and run. And this is exactly what we should be seeing. So far, so good. Okay, we need to do one final preparatory thing before we begin to code, and that is to add our plist to our project. And as I mentioned before, I have this plist posted on my YouTube About page, and it's quite a long file, so I encourage you to go ahead and download it. So I have it here on my desktop. Let me open up the folder. And it's called surgical_procedures.plist. And I'm simply going to click on that, drag it over, and drop it in my project. In doing so, make sure that this first box, copy items into your destinations folder, it has been selected. We'll click finish. And now our plist has been added to the file. So let's go ahead and stretch that back out and take a look at that real quick. And as you can see here, it's a dictionary with 11 primary keys. And each of those keys is a category that contains numerous surgical procedures. So if I were to go down the line here and open up each one of these, you see that there's quite a bit of information, literally 100 or so surgical procedures in here. So it's well worth your while to go ahead and download that instead of trying to type all this in. So we'll come back over here. And that pretty much wraps it up for preliminary, so now we're ready to begin coding. So let's turn our attention over to our surgical procedures TableView controller header file. And in our header, we need a couple of properties to hold our dictionary and our keys. So first, we'll create a property for our dictionary. Make this non-atomic and strong. And we'll call this is in this dictionary, and it's called surgical procedures. And next, we'll create a property to hold all of our dictionary keys. Now these keys will be used as our TableView sections, and we'll call these sections categories. So once again, add property, non-atomic, and strong. And this time it's NS array, and the array name will be categories. And that's all we need to do in our header file. So let's jump over to the implementation file, and we'll synthesize those two properties. At synthesize, and it's surgical procedures and categories. Another nice thing about synthesizing properties is it eliminates the need to use an underscore before the name too. So let's allocate and initialize our dictionary and array, and the best place to do that is in the viewDidLoad method. We'll start off creating a string that will hold the path information for our plist. Now incidentally, in iOS we don't have direct access to the file system. Instead, we use NSBundle to refer to the area where iOS stores its files. So let's first get rid of these comments. And we'll start off by creating a string to hold our path. And we'll call the string path. And as I indicated, we need to refer to NSBundle, main bundle, and we'll use the path for resource. And the first thing it's asking us for is the resource name or file name, and in our case it is surgical underscore procedures. And we need to capitalize P. It's very important that you don't have any spelling errors or typo errors in these methods, otherwise it won't find the file. And the type, of course, will be Plist. Now let's initialize our dictionary with the contents of our file, and to do so we use our dictionary, which is surgical procedures equals ns dictionary with contents of file. And of course we'll just use path to point it to the direction of our file. And finally, we need to strip out all the keys in our dictionary, sort them alphabetically, and add them to our array called categories. So we write that like this: categories equals surgical procedures, and we want to use the method allKeys, and then sorted using selector selector, and our selector will be compare. And that does it for this method. Now let's move on to our first TableView data source method, and that is the number of sections in TableView. And the first thing we'll do is remove the warning. Now the easiest way to determine the number of sections we have is to count the number of keys we have in our categories array. So to do that, we simply use the instance method count to our categories array. So this is return bracket categories and count. Okay, next up, TableView number of rows in section method. Now it gets a little tricky here. We have to determine the number of rows in each section, and to do that we need to count the number of surgical procedures in each section. Let me write the line of code first and then we'll take a closer look at it. So first of all, let's get rid of our warning here. And we will start off with an NS array, and we'll call that array procedures array. And we get that from our surgical procedures dictionary, categories, and section. So we needed a temporary array to hold all of the procedures within each category, and we named this procedures array. We'll populate our array by grabbing the value of each item as our method cycles through each section. A section is a parameter, and I'll highlight it here, that's provided to us by our method and is of type NSInteger. Think of it as an integer representing each category in our dictionary, and recall that we have 11 categories. So our section number starts at 0 and goes from 1, 2, 3 and ends up at 10. So to further analyze this line, let's look at it from right to left. So we get the value assigned to each section in the array categories that's in our dictionary by the name of surgical procedures, and we assign that information to the array called procedures array. Okay, moving on, before we finish coding this method, Let's create a variable and write a log statement here so we can track what's happening behind the scenes in the debugger as this method is called. So first, we'll need a string to hold our category name for each section. So in a string, and we'll just call this category name, and it equals categories and the section. Now we'll write the log statement to print out the category name, the section number, and the procedures count. And this is going to be kind of a long log statement. And slog. And what should we say here? Let's say the category name is %@ for our placeholder. The section, let's see, the section number is, and we need another placeholder. This time it'll be a %d because it's an integer, and the number of procedures in this section is, and last but not least, we need another %d. Okay, now let's add our variables, and the first one will be category name, what we just created. And the next one will be simply section, and the last one will be procedures. We want, yes, procedures array, and the instance method count. And double check all that, looks good. Okay, using log statements obviously within methods as you write them is a great way to understand and analyze what's going on behind the scenes. So finally, before we build and run this, we need to return the count, and to do so we just use a return statement, and we use our procedures array and the instance method count. Okay, before we build and run, I see we have an error here, so let's track that down and try to figure out what that's all about. And expected method to read array element not found on object of type in a string. So in a string, category name equals category name. Okay, this should be categories, not category name. There we go. Okay, so before we build, let's add a couple of breakpoints so we can stop this in a few places and take a close look at it. And now we're ready to build and run. And we'll go ahead and bring this up a little bit, give us a little bit more room. Okay, so you see over in our variables pane, we have our table view, we have our section. Right now our section is at section 10, which is the last section in the array. Whenever the application enumerates through an array, it always goes to the end and then works its way back to the beginning and forward. The procedures array, we have 0 objects so far. We have 11 objects that are categories. We know that because we have 11 key value pairs. So let's go ahead and step through this a couple of times here. And I'll step through until I get my log output. So the output says the category name is ungroup, which as we know is the last category in our array. The section number is 10, and the number of procedures in this section is 9. And we can verify that by looking at our variables tray here. We have in our procedures array 9 objects, the category name is ungrouped, and the section number is 10. So let's go ahead and cycle through this a couple of times just to give you an idea of what is going on. Remember, this particular method is going to be called 11 times because we have 11 sections or categories in our array, or in our dictionary rather. So here you see it's gone back to the very first section, which is bone joint. The section number is 0 and the number of procedures in this particular section is 5. And this is also verified in our variables pane. So as you can see, this is a really good way of really analyzing and understanding better what's happening behind the scenes. So let's go ahead and stop this build. We'll go ahead and get rid of our breakpoints now. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this log statement because we don't need that anymore. And we won't need this string either. All we need in this method is the array and the account for that array. Okay, now for the infamous self_arrow_at_index_path method. Let's first get rid of all the code that's provided to us. And we'll start from scratch and talk our way through it. So the first thing we need to do is ask the table view for any reusable cells. This is an iOS memory management function that eliminates the need to create and hold in memory dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of TableView cells. So once a TableView cell scrolls off the visible screen, it's then dequeued and made available for reuse. So the way that we do that is UI TableView cell, and we'll call this cell with a lowercase c, equals TableView dequeue reusable cell with identifier. Now we're going to make our identifier the word cell with a capital C. Now this is just a tag. It can really be anything. We can say cell, we can say Tom, Dick, or Harry. It's just a tag. It's a way to identify in code the type of cell that we're using. But it's very important that we also add this into our storyboard. So let's go over to our storyboard. We'll click on our surgical procedures table view, and we'll open up our inspectors panel. And we'll click on our table view cell, and under the attributes inspection there's a field called identifier, and we want to make sure that in our case the word cell is in there, which it was. It's very important that this matches the code. So let's jump back over to our implementation file. We'll close out our inspectors panel. Now, using an if statement, we can check to see if we already have a UI TableView cell, and if not, we'll initialize one. So this is very simple. We'll use an if cell is equal to nil. In other words, we don't have one. Then we're going to go ahead and create one. Cell equals UI TableView cell alloc. And then we want to init with style. And we'll just start typing UI TableView cell style, and it shows all the choices we have, but we're going to choose default. And then it asks for our reuse identifier, and as we mentioned before, ours is going to be capital CELL. Okay. So now that we've initialized our cell, it's time to configure it with data, and to do that we need to first create a string to hold our category name. So in a string, and we'll call the string category, and we use the categories array, object at index, and we want to use the index path section. The method section. Let's see, let me fix that up. Perfect. Okay, next we'll create an array to hold all the procedures in each category. And to do this, we use our dictionary with category, the string we just created, as our parameter. So ns array, and as I mentioned, we'll call this procedures equals our dictionary, surgical procedures, and category. We want to make sure we choose category, our string, and not our array name. Now we want to get the name of the procedure at a specific row of the array and assign it to our cell's text label. This time we'll use the indexPath.row as our parameter. So we write that cell.textLabel.text equals our array, which is procedures, and in brackets indexPath.row. And the last thing we need to do is return a UI TableView cell, and we do that just by return cell. Okay, let's build and run. And it looks pretty good, except our table is not divided into sections. We still need to code one more method to give us a title for each section in our table. We need the title for header and section method. So let's close this, stop it. And incidentally, if you forget the name of a method that you need, a great way to find it is, and let me just show you a trick here. Let's go over to our header file, and we're going to option click on UI TableView controller. And that's going to open up a dialog box. And there you'll see where the header link is, and we're going to click on that header link. And then once again, we're going to look for the UI TableView data source, which is the protocol that we're interested in. Option click once more, and click on that header. And that takes us to the protocol and both the required and optional methods. Now we've already executed the required methods here. And the optional method that we're looking for is TableView, title for header, and section. So let's just go ahead and copy that. Do a Control-C. We'll jump back over to our implementation file. And directly below the self-heroic index path, we'll go ahead and paste that method. We have to do a little housekeeping here, and that is we need to get rid of the semicolon and add curly braces. So all we need to do here is to use the section parameter against our categories array, which gives us the name of each category, and we need to return that. Remember, the names in our categories array are the names of our section. So we do a return categories and section. That's it. Let's build and run. And that looks much better. Now we have all our section names, all our category names, and all the procedures listed alphabetically within each section. So there's one more thing we can do to make this table really look professional, and that's change its style to group. So let's do that now. Let's stop the run here. We're going to go to our storyboard, and we're going to select our table view and open up our utilities panel. And let's select the table view, and you can see under the attributes inspector there's a style. Right now it's set to plain. Let's change that to group. Let's go ahead and build and run. This looks perfect now. As you can see, this is a much better way of displaying our information. Okay, that about does it for part 2 of Table Views. I hope it's been helpful. Look for other videos coming soon on other iOS development topics. And until then, thanks for watching, and please subscribe to my channel.